The air inside the old train station was stagnant, thick with the scent of mildew and abandonment. It was always midnight when she came here. Amira Khaled, 22, a ghost of herself, wrapped in a black hoodie with eyes that hadn't known peace since childhood. She sat on the cracked bench near Platform 3, where rats had replaced passengers and silence replaced announcements. She pressed play on the small recorder in her hand.
"You will never remember what you see here," a man's voice hissed. "That is the gift of silence." Click! That voice, again, always the same tone, calm, calculated, like he owned time itself. The voice of Benjamin Netanyahu, once a prime minister, now a ghost haunting her blood. Amira had been one of hundreds. Back in 2005, Israeli forces swept into southern Gaza after a series of retaliatory strikes. Amid the dust and smoke, they pulled dozens of orphaned children from rubble, crying, injured, trembling. The news showed soldiers handing them candy. The world applauded Israel's humanitarian initiative. But those children didn't go to hospitals. They went to Beit Keshet, a remote facility in the Negev desert. Project Keshet, officially listed as a trauma rehabilitation center, was in fact a black site. It had no signage, no official map entry, just satellite interference and encrypted communications routed through 5 different defense contractors in Tel Aviv, Virginia, and Warsaw. Amira remembered only pieces: cold floors, bright lights, mechanical voices. The first year, they removed her name. The second, her language. By year 3, she no longer spoke. She wasn't alone. Project Keshet was the brainchild of Netanyahu's clandestine psychological security division. The goal? To train children from enemy regions to become data silos, living behavioral weapons. Under the guise of therapy, these children underwent neural reconditioning, constant loops of violent images, controlled sleep schedules, chemical injections that dulled empathy and heightened obedience. "Peace is won through silence," Netanyahu was recorded saying at a closed-door briefing in 2007. "We must create silence." He wasn't a distant bureaucrat. He visited Beit Keshet twice a year, not as a leader, but as a god. The staff called him Hamelech, the king. Children were instructed to kneel, to avoid eye contact, to repeat one phrase upon his entry: "We are your echo. We will not scream." In public, Netanyahu smiled for the cameras, shook hands with UN officials, signed ceasefire agreements. In secret, he funded a project that turned grief into programming code, turned the wounded into obedient assets. Only one child escaped the full reprogramming: Amira. A power outage during a 2010 thunderstorm shut down the containment wing for 9 minutes. In that window, a sympathetic nurse named Layla Tamari unlocked Amira's cell and led her to a hidden service tunnel. Layla never made it out. Amira was found days later, wandering the highway outside Beersheba, unresponsive. She was taken in by a Belgian relief organization and eventually adopted. The doctors said her mind was clean. She had no memory of her origin. But the silence never left. Years passed. She grew into a quiet young woman, drawn to psychology, languages, data encryption. In 2023, she stumbled onto a digital leak posted on a dark web forum known only as Ashes. Inside, hundreds of files marked Keshet Protocol. And there she was, file KES 47-Delta-AmiraK.mp4. The memories flooded back like blood from a reopened wound. She wasn't a survivor. She was evidence. She reached out to a dissident journalist named Lara Berman, once banned from Israel for publishing footage of Palestinian executions. Lara verified the files, traced financial links to Netanyahu's personal accounts. Together, they assembled a timeline of atrocities so vast, so methodically evil, that even seasoned war correspondents broke into tears reviewing the data. Beit Keshet was still operational, under a new name, with new children. The plan was simple. They would go public. Lara would publish the report. Amira would testify at The Hague. They underestimated Netanyahu. Within a week, Lara's Amsterdam office was burned to the ground. Her data backups were destroyed. An anonymous email arrived. The children were silent. So should you be. 2 days later, Amira was followed home. Her apartment ransacked. The only item missing, her childhood drawing, a red kite flying above barbed wire. She knew what it meant. They were warning her, "We still own your memories." But she wouldn't stop. She sent the files to international agencies, activist networks, human rights tribunals. A global wave of anger erupted. Children of Keshet trended worldwide. Thousands of adoptees came forward with eerily similar stories, memory gaps, recurring dreams, phrases like "order through silence." Israeli officials denied everything. Fabrications by terrorist sympathizers, they said. But every denial cracked under the pressure of evidence. Medical scans, funding documents, footage of Netanyahu inside the facilities. One leak shattered the illusion completely. An audio file from 2011. Netanyahu speaking directly. "Do you know what peace costs? Compliance. Children taught to obey. That's how we win wars without firing a bullet. Give me 100 of them, and I'll end a generation." The backlash was immediate. Mass protests, global sanctions. Netanyahu was stripped of diplomatic immunity. The International Criminal Court issued a preliminary indictment, and then he vanished.
Netanyahu vanished like a shadow unmoored from its body. Interpol issued a red notice, and every major European intelligence agency scrambled to track him. Yet, somehow, he was always one step ahead. Reports claimed he was seen in Buenos Aires, then in a private Russian compound near Sochi, then in the jungles of Brazil under the protection of a former arms cartel. Each sighting less verifiable than the last. But one thing was certain. He had gone underground. The Israeli government, under intense international pressure, launched an internal probe. But the panel was chaired by Netanyahu loyalists. Unsurprisingly, the findings concluded: no credible evidence of wrongdoing. Meanwhile, Amira moved from safe house to safe house, her face now known worldwide. She had become a symbol. Some called her a hero. Others accused her of treason. In Tel Aviv, nationalists burned her image in effigy, chanting, "Kol Yisrael Aravim." All Israel is responsible. But beyond the hate, something had shifted. Children across the globe, especially war refugees adopted into Western homes, began reporting identical symptoms: blackouts, intense fear of authority figures, recurring nightmares involving fluorescent lights and metallic voices. Trauma specialists coined it the Keshet pattern. Thousands of adults began to suspect they had been part of something darker than adoption. In Nairobi, a girl named Ayana began speaking in Hebrew phrases, though she had never learned the language. In Poland, a boy drew detailed schematics of a lab he swore he never visited. In Canada, an 11-year-old refugee cried whenever she heard the word order. Activist groups formed, naming themselves the Echo Children. Their logo, a red kite tangled in barbed wire. Amira, with the help of cyber activist group Pale Flame, began uploading Keshet documents daily to an encrypted network accessible only through the dark web. Each document bore a header: property of the silenced. One file shook the world. It contained 7 hours of footage from inside Beit Keshet. recorded on a secure Mossad backup server. Children as young as 4, subjected to auditory command loops. One scene showed a child forced to listen to Netanyahu's voice reading from Deuteronomy, interrupted every 5 seconds by a buzzer. If the child stopped repeating, the lights would flicker violently. Psychological torture, disguised as therapy. The footage spread like fire. News anchors broke down on live television. UNICEF demanded an emergency session at the UN General Assembly. Protesters in São Paulo, Berlin, and Seoul built mock Beit Keshet labs in public squares. Inside each, silence, bright lights, a chair, a child-sized mannequin strapped in. Netanyahu, still unseen, released a single message through a proxy journalist in Uruguay. "I did what was necessary. History will understand." That single sentence was the match. The International Criminal Court formally indicted Netanyahu for crimes against humanity. Former Mossad officials were arrested. 6 governments suspended intelligence cooperation with Israel. And still, Beit Keshet remained silent. Until a whistleblower spoke. Her name was Yael Schechter, a neuroscientist who had worked on Project Keshet from 2006 to 2014. She uploaded a 46-minute confession video from an undisclosed location. In it, she described the experiments, the command hierarchy, and Netanyahu's direct involvement. "He wasn't distant," she said. "He designed the command loops. He approved the neural suppression methods. He personally requested linguistic data. He watched them suffer." She broke down midway, describing a 3-year-old boy who went blind after a 36-hour light exposure test. I asked him once, "Do you ever think they'll remember any of this?" And he said, "That's the point. A silent child is a future loyalist." The video ended with coordinates to a mass grave near the Beit Keshet compound. Investigators found 37 tiny bodies. The world erupted. Israel's government fell into chaos. Riots surged. Streets filled with candlelight vigils and Molotov cocktails. Universities cut ties with state funding. Netanyahu's name was stripped from public buildings. His statues toppled. In his absence, he became legend, a myth of cruelty. In New York, artist collectives projected his face onto skyscrapers alongside the words, "Silence is a weapon." In Tokyo, a VR experience simulated Beit Keshet. The tagline, "Don't blink, don't speak." In London, school children learned about the Keshet trials alongside the Nuremberg trials. The echo of Netanyahu's crimes became louder than any speech he'd ever given. And still, Amira endured. Now, hiding in South Africa under an alias, she continued her uploads. Her health was failing, but her resolve was intact. In her final video, she looked directly into the lens and said, "They made us forget. But now we remember everything. And that means they've already lost." Then she smiled, a soft, broken, tired smile. 2 weeks later, her apartment exploded. But the videos kept coming. Pale Flame revealed they had backed up all of Amira's archives and scheduled weekly releases for the next 2 years. Each file marked with the same phrase, "For the children who couldn't speak." The final blow came in 2027, when a secret recording of Netanyahu himself was leaked from a Swiss vault. In it, he spoke to an unknown interlocutor. Democracy is a performance, but silence, that's real power, the kind no one votes against. By 2028, Netanyahu was officially declared an international fugitive. His last known location, a bunker beneath the Patagonian steppe. His name, etched forever into the ledger of infamy. And all across the world, in classrooms, homes, refugee camps, children who once forgot were learning to remember. Because silence is not the absence of noise, it is the presence of truth waiting to speak. And monsters, no matter how deep they hide, cannot silence memory forever. In the months after the final leak, the world seemed divided into two timelines, before the recordings and after. Before, Netanyahu had been seen as complex, polarizing perhaps, a statesman with a hard line, a survivor of countless political storms. After, he was a criminal, a manipulator of silence, a man who twisted children into weapons, who saw morality as a chessboard and war as arithmetic. Despite the global warrants and border blocks, whispers began surfacing from the southern hemisphere. Journalists reported strange aircraft movements over uninhabited stretches of Argentina and Chile. Locals near the Andes claimed to see caravans escorted by mercenaries. Drones captured partial images of underground bunkers shielded by active radar interference. One photo, grainy and distant, showed a figure stepping from a vehicle flanked by guards. Though blurred, the gait, the stiff-shouldered posture, was unmistakable. Netanyahu was alive, and he was building something. From a hidden facility beneath the Patagonian rock, a new kind of war had begun. It wasn't military, it was narrative. Through offshore shell companies and deep-web social engineering hubs, Netanyahu funded thousands of AI-generated news outlets, each one designed to cast doubt on the Keshet documents, each one planting alternative explanations. Western manipulation, deep fake technology, leftist conspiracy. He even created false whistleblowers who confessed to fabricating the footage. The goal was not to convince the world he was innocent. The goal was confusion, to bury the truth beneath a million variations of it. And for a time, it worked. News anchors began using the term alleged again. Governments grew quiet. The ICC trial stalled. Key witnesses disappeared. Evidence servers were hit by coordinated cyber attacks. But what Netanyahu hadn't anticipated, what he never could calculate, was the rage of children who grew into adults. One of them was Leo Moreno, a Chilean-born data engineer adopted into Spain in 2009. At age 24, he unlocked a suppressed memory during a therapy session. A room with white walls, the sound of dripping water, a man placing a hand on his shoulder saying, "You are the silence we feed on." Leo spent the next 6 months tracking Netanyahu's media campaigns. He mapped over 1,100 disinformation nodes. He partnered with Pale Flame and launched ShatterNet, an AI counter-propaganda weapon designed to hunt and dismantle falsified narratives in real time. Within weeks, the media campaign crumbled. False articles were flagged with live annotations. AI-generated faces were reverse-engineered. Every lie was marked, time-stamped, dismantled. And still, the story spread, not just as a scandal, but as a movement. Universities introduced courses called Memory Ethics, the Keshet Case. Churches held memorials for unnamed children. Artists painted silence as resistance, mouths sewn shut, eyes wide open. And in Tel Aviv, once the seat of his power, a group of mothers stood outside the former Knesset building, holding photos of their missing children. They said nothing. They just stared. In Patagonia, Netanyahu grew paranoid. He moved bunkers every 2 weeks. He held meetings only through analog devices. But the isolation took its toll. Trusted aides abandoned him. His funding dried up. He relied on Russian oil barons and dying autocrats to keep his network alive. Still, he wouldn't stop. He believed the world was weak. That time erased sins. That history only remembered winners. But the silence he forged was no longer his to control. Because somewhere, always, a child was remembering. And in 2029, the unthinkable happened. A young girl named Rina Abdal, 14 years old, stepped onto a TEDx stage in New York. She had never spoken publicly before. She had been mute for 10 years. But with trembling hands, she lifted a drawing, a red kite, and she said, "I remember him." The room fell silent. She described a metal hallway, a flashing light, a man with eyes like frost who told her, "The world is chaos. You are order." She described the room temperature, the chemical scent, the echo of her own cries, and most of all, the face. Netanyahu. The footage went viral. Within 48 hours, over 12,000 other children, or now young adults, submitted matching memories. The UN was forced to act. A global tribunal was reassembled. Interpol's cyber division traced recent financial movements linked to Netanyahu's last bunker. The location: a series of abandoned Cold War-era missile silos in southern Argentina. An elite joint task force descended. What they found was beyond comprehension. Underground servers filled with mind-mapping software. Recordings of Keshet sessions stored as metadata, indexed by child code numbers. Dozens of artificial intelligence models trained to simulate emotional profiles based on real trauma. It was as if he had tried to bottle silence, to engineer obedience into data. And in the center of it all, gone. Netanyahu had escaped again. But not without leaving behind a final message. A note written on the wall in black marker: "Truth is irrelevant when silence is inherited." That same week, 144 hard drives were extracted from the compound and sent to Geneva. The tribunal began again. This time, the evidence was indisputable. The world was watching, and the sentence was unanimous. Life sentence, in absentia, crimes against humanity, psychological warfare, child experimentation, state-directed manipulation of memory. Netanyahu became the first world leader sentenced posthumously by truth. And the world finally began to heal. They called it the last broadcast. It aired without warning on April 3, 2030. Every major satellite signal across South America experienced a synchronized blackout. For precisely 11 minutes and 47 seconds, all screens, phones, televisions, billboards, flickered, and then displayed a single image. Netanyahu, aged, hollow-cheeked, eyes sunken like stone pits. He sat in a darkened room with concrete walls and a single flickering bulb above his head. And he spoke, not in Hebrew, not in English, but in what AI linguists later dubbed a code-laced dialect, a fractured speech composed of old propaganda phrases, religious metaphors, and command keywords lifted from the Keshet project. The quiet is not your enemy. It is your inheritance. Those who scream forget their place. I am not a villain. I am your architect. The world froze. For days, analysts combed through the video. The message wasn't a confession. It wasn't a denial. It was something else entirely. A trigger. Within 72 hours of the broadcast, dozens of echo children, individuals believed to have undergone early Keshet exposure, began exhibiting sudden neurological symptoms: nosebleeds, blackouts, psychogenic tremors. Some collapsed mid-sentence. Some fell into catatonic silence. Experts determined that Netanyahu's final speech had embedded frequencies, subliminal audio pulses that matched the conditioning tones used in Beit Keshet. It was a final strike, a post-truth weapon, a psychic scar reopened. He had turned silence into a virus. But he underestimated the one thing he could never simulate: collective defiance. From Rio to Reykjavik, thousands of echo survivors uploaded their own voices, raw, unfiltered, trembling. They said their names, their memories, their truths. My name is Khaled. I was made to forget my sister's face. I remember now. My name is Julia. He told me I had no family, but my mother searched 15 years. My name is Zion. I was 3, and I know what he did. Each video ended with the same 3 words: I am loud. Within weeks, the counter-broadcast campaign had spread to over 90 countries. Children once silenced became the center of attention. Schools invited them to speak. Museums created exhibits with their drawings. Libraries stored their voices. Memorials were built, not to Netanyahu, but to the ones he tried to erase. And amid this cultural reckoning, another miracle surfaced. In a collapsed section of the Patagonian bunker, UN investigators found a hidden room. Inside, a rusted steel chair, chains still attached, and a single journal beneath the floor panel. It was Amira's. Somehow, she had been there. Or at least, her words had made it. The journal contained handwritten entries, timelines, facility maps, and finally, what analysts called the memory map, a detailed schema of trauma-induced silence converted into neurosymbolic code. Amira had reverse-engineered her own conditioning. On the last page, a message. I wasn't born to be an echo. I was born to break the silence. That sentence was printed across buildings, shirts, city walls. A new generation had found its rallying cry. Epilogue: The world without him. By 2032, Benjamin Netanyahu had become the most studied figure in psychological warfare history. His name appeared not in law textbooks or military doctrines, but in ethics curriculums, art galleries, survivor poetry, and therapy centers. Historians debated whether he was a tyrant, a manipulator, or a man who believed too deeply in the utility of fear. But the world had already decided. He was evil. And like all architects of silence, he was ultimately swallowed by the very thing he created. His body was never found. Some say he died in the tunnels. Others claim he fled to Antarctica or the depths of a Russian safe haven. But none of it mattered. Because now, when a child was asked about Beit Keshet, they didn't lower their eyes. They looked straight into the camera and said, "Ask me what I remember." Legacy. A global NGO named The Children's Voice emerged from the ashes of Keshet. It taught survivors how to speak, not just linguistically, but artistically, politically, digitally. A monument was built in Geneva, a sculpture of a broken microphone with red kite ribbons tied to its base. And once every year, on April 3rd, every screen in the world goes dark for 11 minutes and 47 seconds. Not in fear, but in remembrance. Not of Netanyahu, but of what happens when silence becomes currency.